What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Terror Table, a horror movie podcast that is presented to Saskatchewan Podcast Network. My name is Mitch, and I'm one of your regular hosts that you hear every single week, and today I am joined by one of my favorite people to talk movies with, Skot Hamilton, the film programmer at the Broadway Theatre, and a member of it. You play bass in Ken Mode?
Ken Mode, yeah, that bass in that band, and then, well, do I play bass in anything else anymore? I don't even know anymore, man.
Just in so many bands. Yeah, so you're in Ken Mode, Adolyne, Grey Light District. Do you have any new bands that I don't know about yet?
I have a few things that have started in the pandemic that, actually, I literally can't even spoil them. They don't have names yet. I think I've started like 3 fantasy bands that don't really, like, just all these little silos of music that don't belong in my prior bands. I gotta stop doing that to myself.
No, never stop creating. But yeah, either way, we just finished up at the 11th annual Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival. And if you listened to our previous episodes before, I guess I should give a quick shout out since it's been a couple of weeks since we've recorded. Sorry that you have to be here for this, but I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who reached out and gave us some positive feedback about our last episode on Hereditary with Cassie. That was an incredibly rewarding episode for us. We loved talking to her, and it's one of my favorite episodes we've done just because of her presence.
She's a great guest. That was a really, really solid episode.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, she was great, and she will be back. We will get her back eventually. But today we are going to focus on the 16 feature films that were played at the Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival. We're going to go from the last Monday night. I guess people listening to this, it would be relative. We're going to go from the beginning to the end. And I don't think we're going to talk about every single short film because I think that's just going to...
There are so many short films. If you haven't been to the festival before, the formatting basically is that the programming team always tries to find a complimentary short film to go with it, and it's great. Sometimes I always fly the flag on the short films and try to make sure people take them in because on occasion I think some of the best stuff that's been programmed are the shorts, and that's not really something people are acclimatized to thinking. People don't think about short films.
No.
Or that, all of your favorite all your favorite directors at some point in time probably made really great short films.
Totally.
So there's some really great stuff going on in there and some good early proof of concept stuff, but going into them, that means we're covering what's with the math here, 32 films instead of 16.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I think we'll just highlight I want to highlight a couple that I loved, and I think we'll do that right off the top if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
And then get into the films.
And I'm guilty on this front because I was working this entire thing. I typically didn't see a lot of the short films, so I'm gonna pull up a seat and I'm just gonna listen.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be very quick because I marked down 3 that I wanted to talk about that I think people should all check out. Granted, some of these you obviously can't see yet, but just keep an eye out for them. And yeah, like you said, that's one of the unsung heroes of the film festival is the short films.
And another thing too, if you're listening, you're locked in at this point. So grab a pen and paper because in a lot of cases, these films, when they do become available, they'll be free. They'll be up online because there's not really any way of monetizing a lot of this stuff. So within a couple of years, anything that Mitch recommends is probably going to be just right at your fingertips. So it's good to take notes on titles.
Absolutely. And actually one of them has a Blu-ray release right now, so you can get it, and it's my favorite one of the festival, my favorite short film, but you can pick it up if you're a US listener. I think it's very affordable. I think with the exchange rate for us it's a little bit much, but because it's exchange rate of the US, I can't spend $45 on a short film. But they are ridiculous and awesome to say the least. So I'm just trying to find... All right, yeah, I guess I'll just start off with MILKTEETH. Did you see this one? This played before Dinner in America.
I can't... run me through it again. For some reason I'm blanking, but the title is so familiar that it's driving me nuts.
Yeah, so essentially what it is it's a...
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, I did see this one, and it was great.
Yeah, it's a kid in an orphanage and for a foster home. Sorry, orphanage, foster home? What would...
I believe in this particular case it would be an orphanage. Yeah.
So the kid loses one of his teeth, puts it under his pillow, and is I don't want to spoil anything. And keep in mind these are sometimes 6-minute short films. Mm-hmm. So it's a really, really cool monster like creature feature short film.
It gets a lot done in a very short period of time too.
Totally. Yeah. And it definitely has like a Guillermo del Toro aesthetic to it, like something like a dark fantasy. Incredible practical effects. They look amazing in it. And they really come up with a creature that I would love to see in a feature. So I think this is our response to Darkness Falls from 2002. Do you remember that movie?
I never actually saw that one.
It's bad.
I always thought it looked horrible. I think that I guess if we're trying not to spoil this one, I would say what type of monster is in it. But the monster in question that's being it's called MILKTEETH, a tooth fairy like character. Always deserved a good movie, and I definitely haven't seen that yet. This is the closest to it.
Entirely agree. And yeah, it's basically just a Tooth Fairy-esque monster short film, and the creature looks amazing, and it's something that I would love to see a feature of.
And also for in terms of like a lot of the people who are making short films or maybe just getting started or something like that, and a lot of the time will elect to do things a little bit more simply, but in this particular case they did the I'm not going to say cardinal sin, but they brought in a lot of child actors, which a lot of the time people try to avoid, and in this particular case, like, very well played.
Oh yeah, totally paid off. Yeah, it paid off. That one is once again MILKTEETH, so keep an eye out for that one. The next one I want to shine light on is Solution for Sadness. Did you watch this one? This was played before Jumbo.
No, I did not. No.
Yeah, so this is it's a comedy, mystery, sci-fi short. It's not a horror short at all. I should also clarify that some of the films we're going to be talking about today are not horror films. But we do this every year. We like to round up the entire festival and just talk about what we saw. But yeah, Solution for Sadness. The synopsis is: a mysterious package offers a woman a reprieve from her melancholy. Only its results are more permanent and pervasive than she realizes. It's just crazy funny, goofy, quirky stuff. If you look it up, you didn't see this one. That's the one with the gorilla masks.
No, I definitely would have remembered seeing gorilla masks.
And I think you would have liked this one. I really enjoyed it. It played before Jumbo, which was like probably our most art house film that we showed this year.
There were a few. Well, I guess we'll get into that. Yeah.
But it's definitely a little art house. But we were like, the theater was busting a gut laughing at this thing. It's very, very clever and very well done. And then the last one I want to shout out is my favorite of the whole festival, which was the second short that we saw in the whole festival, which was The Haunted Swordsman, which played before Frank and Zed. Did you see this one?
Luckily for me, it's another one that I did see.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is played before. We're going to be talking about Frank and Zed, which is a puppet horror action film. I don't even know how
everything but the kitchen sink type movie. Yeah.
Exactly. But The Haunted Swordsman is one that you can... I believe there's an Instagram page for it, so you could just follow that, and I'm sure it'll go up online soon for you to be able to see. I'm just trying to pull the thing up again. Yeah, but the synopsis is: a Ronin travels on a quest for vengeance against a supernatural entity. So the reason this one is so amazing, it's directed by Kevin McTurk. I don't know if he's done special effects on Jurassic Park, special effects on The Time Machine. Looks like he's primarily worked in special effects. Which
makes sense, because the puppetry in this particular case is absolutely world class. It's beautiful.
Yeah, totally agree. This thing is just, it's a 16-minute short, and I so badly want a feature. I think it was so interesting.
Well, and again, like, I mean, in terms of if the interest can... It's a tough concept to prove and see through to being an entire picture, but if there's enough interest in it, I would hope so too, because it can carry it for sure. And on paper, I would be a little bit trepidatious about that, because you start getting into like kind of a territory where you worry about the effect wearing off. But in this particular case, he has the juice to make it happen. I fully believe that after seeing that short.
Totally agree. It's gorgeous to look at. So look it up if you can, and pay attention for that one. But with all those out of the way, we can get right into the film festival. So starting out with night one, we're just going to go through each one of these things. And I think we'll take turns, offer it, like, if you're comfortable, giving a little bit of a synopsis about what we're talking about. So Psycho Goreman.
So this is one thing I missed, just the front end of. I know that the film is kind of tangentially related to the Astron 6 crew. Yep. I don't think it's an official Astron 6 title though, right?
No, it's Steven Kostanski, who was in Astron 6.
Yeah, right. Part of that crew, and it does certainly show it a picture about Where do you say this? Almost sounds like describing a Scientology sidebar when you discuss the early end of this film. It is about an alien prisoner, I guess, who lands on Earth and who can be controlled by an amulet that ends up in the hands of a young girl who's a very bossy young girl. Her and her brother have a very, well, I don't know if I want to call it a fraught relationship, but a combative relationship with each other, and we kind of go through them and their families. I think it's safe to say kind of they're not the most well-adjusted family. I think that's some of the joy in the film is the family relationship stuff, which is a reoccurring thing for this year's festival, actually. I've noticed a lot of family relationship stuff. But it's just kind of the background on the family. What ends up happening is once we come into contact with the alien, the titular Psycho Goreman, and the kids develop their relationship with them, it turns into this odd mix of almost, I don't want to say the B plot, but like a very, very similar relationship that we've seen in a few other films. It seems to harken back to the early John Connor Terminator relationship in Terminator 2, as well as I think that the children in the Frankenstein in Monster Squad a little bit. It's the kid and the monster being at the beck and call of the kid type relationship, and that's kind of at the center of this. There are all of these intergalactic interests on the Psycho Goreman, though, and they start to kind of swirl around the events and turn up, and then that ends up seeing the film go from being what is playing oddly is this kind of like almost upbeat comedy with a like kind of sci-fi visual, and turning into this violent, almost I always forget the name of the style of filmmaking, but the Power Rangers.
That's exactly Power Rangers is what I was going with.
Yeah. I know there's a particular style of what that's called, but it turns into these heavily costumed battles, except for there is a focus on driving those further into kind of a gore, as the title would suggest, a gore territory. Yeah. A lot of these things all mixed up to me sounds like kind of a drag. I was surprised how much I enjoyed this movie. I'm
so happy to hear that, because I've seen this thing get beat up a little online.
Oh, really?
And I'm so happy to report that I had such a good time with this movie.
It is funny. Everyone I've talked to almost has said that I was prepared to not enjoy this, and then was kind of like, fine, it's really good, it's really fun. The kids, I think that we were talking about children acting earlier, and this is something that is always towing the line of getting very annoying. Specifically the young girl, but she is supposed to be a prick. She's supposed to be really difficult and hard to deal with, and she is just that from front to back. Like, just kind of were she a little bit older, she would be considered irredeemable.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's something really funny about watching like someone of her age behave this way that is very funny. But I guarantee you, if you talk to the wrong person, they will be so out so early in this because of her.
I'm gonna be like, that was one of the main things that we talked about in the programming meeting. Was this little girl and how annoying she is, but she is doing her job, and this was my second watch for this one, and it was much better. Like, I really enjoyed it the first time. But this movie needs to be seen with an audience or friends or like a group setting. It really benefits from that, because the theater was it was pretty clear that everyone was enjoying it. I talked to some attendees who said that it was their favorite of the whole festival.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
so
good.
I'm very happy that there was some representation for the things that they enjoy, because not every movie that we show is like this.
No.
But it's always fun when we throw in something this wacky and crazy and bloody. I was picturing this to be a midnight screening, but we let off with it. It was our very first, and I kind of love that.
I think it was a really good way of starting the thing off, because there is Astron 6 crowd always has, I mean, they're so aesthetically concerned, which I think that's something that could almost be turned into a bit of a criticism of them, which is they are style forward. But I don't think that is necessarily a problem. If they let that, like, the style get in the way of them doing a good job, that would be an issue. But in this particular case, well, no, in most cases with them, like, I'm not in love with everything that they've done, but they never really let the style get over them to the point where it's not enjoyable. And this is one where, like, I think even more than usual, it's such an enjoyable watch.
I definitely think it's one of their, like, well, once again, it's not technically an Astron 6 film, but given that whole catalog of films, this is definitely up there for me out of the stuff that they've done. And it is just because of the Power Rangers horror movie feel of it all. And it's I loved all the monsters, particularly we're gonna pause.
Rough.
All right, so what you just heard was me spilling my entire pint of beer all over myself. We're not even through the first movie yet, but I guess we can keep going.
This is rowdy.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. It's the Saskatoon Fantastic is the most exciting time of the year. It calls for these kinds of things.
Agreed. So what I was saying to finish out my thoughts on Psycho Goreman was I love the one alien. If we're not going to be talking about any spoilers. We'll do all these spoiler free because the people listening, for the most part, aren't going to be able to see the films until they come out. So
yeah, when it comes to festival stuff like this, a lot of these are exclusives. Like, I mean, as we'll talk about in the next one, we couldn't even advertise what it was before we ran it.
No, exactly. But yeah, so like, not spoilers, but I just want to say that I loved the one monster with the brain and the glass. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah,
that was my favorite one.
Mine was I can't remember what the little boy's name was that he ends up having kind of a personal physical change over the course of the movie very early on, and then they just ride a joke out.
Yes.
That was my favorite design just because it was so preposterous.
Yeah, it was crazy. All right, so yeah, that's, I guess, 2 thumbs up for Psycho Goreman. We're off to a good start. I should also say, like, right off the bat, I really enjoyed this year's festival, so you're not going to be hearing a lot of me digging on any of these movies.
Well, in a lot of ways, like, I mean, I think, personally, I do think that because it's a tighter festival than a lot of others, you only have so many slots, and really, like when you're programming a festival that's like 300 films deep, it just has a tendency to range a lot more wildly. I do think that Saskatoon Fantastic is a festival that has historically been so tightly ran, and because there is a committee attached to it, I mean, no one gets to get carried away just kind of, I don't know, getting into dumb territory.
Exactly. You're just playing something that you, like, everyone who's programming these movies, they have the audience in mind, not just their own personal tastes. Yeah. But it was a great year nonetheless. So we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Moving on. So after Psycho Goreman, we had our secret screening. So John Allison didn't tell anybody about this. I guess, did you know about this one?
I did. I was dealing with the traffic.
Oh, I guess,
so
yeah. Okay, so I hadn't even heard of this film before I started watching it. Well, I guess besides, John told me a couple days before, but I didn't look anything up. But we are talking about Frank and Zed.
Right. And what was the name of the director again? I had just looked him up. He doesn't really have a ton of credits other than stuff. It looks like he's done like it is kind of effects and kind of tactility.
Jesse Blanchard.
Yeah, right. And there does seem to be a bit of a focus on like effects work. Now this is as you already mentioned, because it was prefaced with the Swordsman short. This is another puppet film.
Yeah, this is a. What's the running? An hour and a half, like, so it's a full feature length puppet film. So yeah, and the synopsis is basically 2 reanimated corpses dependent on each other for survival, live a life of solitude until a power-hungry magistrate tricks a group of villagers into attacking their lonely castle, fulfilling an ancient prophecy, the orgy of blood. So this was obviously a first-time watch for you as well?
Yes. Well, yeah, there was no way. I kind of knew just because I was trying to help things along what it was, but I didn't even really look into it. Again, I figured I'm going to be there anyway. I'm going to watch it regardless. I don't want to know too much about going in. So, yeah.
I entirely agree. And, yeah, there is a trailer out for this thing, and I highly recommend everybody go and peep it because it's just this is a different type of beast, this film.
It is. And so so for me, and I think we might split a little bit on this one, I liked a lot to do with, I think, the actual execution of the thing, and I was impressed frequently from a technical perspective in a lot of it. For me, there's a lot of, I don't have solutions for my problems with the film. I'm not saying I have any recommendations for Jesse Blanchard or anything like that. I just know that for me there was some lopsided ends of the movie that made it so that I was kind of wanting for it to cut to the chase a little bit, but at the same time, because it's so lean, there isn't really any room to do that. So again, I don't have any solutions to that, because the aforementioned orgy of blood is something that by the time we get there, I felt like we took too long to get there, but it's actually quite long, so that doesn't make any sense. I have a lot of contrary opinions going on in there. There's a few things early on that I thought it was doing that was alluding to maybe following up on like kind of maybe a comment on like codependency and stuff, because there's some really interesting stuff going on between the two monsters, like the titular monsters early on, where they, as mentioned in the synopsis, where they need each other in order to move forward in the world, or I guess stay in a kind of holding pattern. And I found that all interesting. And again, like the actual process of watching them live was interesting, and like kind of everything needing to be like clockwork and all that kind of thing. And then just how, any one small thing can throw that all out of whack. I did enjoy all those things, and I think overall, it's absolutely worth watching. But I, from a narrative standpoint, eventually it got to a point where I actually wasn't sure what I was watching anymore. Like just in terms of they slow down and they have these really animated puppet conversations, and after a while, like I realized like it was all just washing over me, and I was like, I don't really understand what the motivations are behind anyone doing anything anymore, save for, I am aware that we were heading towards an orgy of blood because they kept referencing it.
Yeah.
So I struggled with this one a little bit.
We're on the exact same page.
Okay.
Exact. So I think it's without a doubt an artistic achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. Like these things. Actually, I'll reference. It's an interview I'll never forget. It was Trey Parker and Matt Stone right after they had made Team America, and they said they had almost quit doing anything after that movie. They said like they'll never do another puppet anything ever again. They said like, you ask an actor to do something. I'm prefacing obviously, but you ask an actor to do something, and maybe you'll have to ask that actor to do it 2 or 3 times before they finally get it right. You ask a puppet to do something, it's going to take him 60 fucking times, and he's never going to get it right. And it was really funny reading press with them around that point. They just wanted to blow their brains out. So I whenever I look at a puppet, I look at a difficulty. So I appreciate the prowess for sure.
Yeah. And that's why I think, like we mentioned, Jesse Blanchard, like the only possible feedback I could give him is that like one of my problems with the film was a lot of the puppets looked the same. Mm-hmm. They looked very similar. So the story just got lost in the blood. Mm-hmm. But I'm not complaining about that blood. No. Especially the puppet blood.
Yeah.
Like it is over the top. It's zany. It's crazy. It is gothic. Mm-hmm. So I want to give a shout out to my friend Daniel Epler. He hosts a podcast called Cobwebs, a gothic cinema podcast where he just goes through Hammer films and anything like that. I think this would be a really cool film for him to discuss on his show.
Yeah, this has more reverence for that end of the pool for sure.
Yeah.
One thing about this movie that I do have to say, though, and this is a huge compliment, towards the end, there's a bit that I will not spoil. It's just a detail in the conclusion that got me so good as far as it moving me emotionally, at a point where I was kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm kind of done here. And then it hit a spot where I actually I clenched up in my chest a little bit, just because and it was a visual cue. It wasn't like it was something that, I don't know, maybe other people thought was funny, but it got me towards the end real good.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
That's a big compliment on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like this thing, it's an abundance of bloodshed. If you're into that, it is something that I would recommend people see, and I'm very grateful we were able to show it at the festival, because even if I wasn't in love with the movie itself, it was a really fun and unique watch, and is unlike anything else I've seen in recent years, besides Haunted Swordsman, which was right before it.
Well,
but Haunted Swordsman is almost entirely different than this because it's treated with such a straight face.
Yeah, and it did Trojan horse that in. I don't think there would have been an excuse to run that film otherwise necessarily, and just having, I think that showing because to a lot of people, like, obviously if you say puppet film, it seems like a very narrow avenue of films you can draw from. Having those two films back to back is proof that is not the case. They are two very different styles of filmmaking. they both fall into, well, it's like having to explain to people that there's different flavors of horror over and over again. To the layman, it's just like, like the Exorcist and Silent Night, Deadly Night 5 are the same type of movie.
Exactly,
and it's just not the case. Not the case.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, so that was Frank and Zed. So that was our Monday night. That was our opening night. Let's move on to Tuesday, which was Punk Night.
Right.
We got to share the Jeff story because that's kind of funny. Like Jeff, our assistant festival director, Jeff Drake, brought his own punk CD. We were planning on blasting punk music through the speakers. Are you okay with talking about this?
Yeah.
I can take this out if you're not.
It's very funny.
It is funny. So was it you or one of your staff?
It was one of our projectionists who actually is not in there all the time. If our regular projectionist had been in it, his weird kind of like projection kung fu and with all of his equipment, he probably would have known how to not make this happen, but something happened. Yeah,
and it's okay. But basically they put the punk CD in the DVD player and the buttons fell inside the DVD player.
Yeah, it detected what was going in, and the thing just imploded, literally.
It's a very punk rock way to start Punk Night.
Yeah.
So we are leading off with Dinner in America.
Dinner in America, which was one that I was so happy to see the festival take on, because I actually saw this one in Fantasia this year, and I did two of the bigger festivals this year. I did Fantasia and TIFF. And Dinner in America was one of my leading movies for festival season, period. Now, this is, again, I'm blanking on the director's name, but he was the guy that did Bunny Games, which I intended on seeing before tonight, and I didn't get a chance to see, because I know that is, much discussed in the kind of like torture porn realms or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Adam Raymeyer?
Yes. And the big thing about that is that this could not be any further from that style of filmmaking. This is kind of more of a in the neighborhood of like Todd Solondz or maybe a little bit of John Waters, not too much, but in that kind of wandering, not particularly plot driven, kind of just character dissection type film that doesn't it's kind of it kind of just rambles and ambles a little bit, and it follows around a character who we initially don't really know who he is by name necessarily, who is in an institution of sorts, basically by electively and doing drug tests on himself for a very meager paycheck. And we kind of get to, early on we're kind of just treated to him just kind of floating through the world and crashing a family's dinner, which is very good, until he ends up and really, like, I mean, plot-wise, trying to go into this one is very difficult, because it kind of just floats from incident to incident, but we end up finding out that this character is on the run from the law. We don't know exactly why. He seems to have ties to some unsavory people. He also seems to have some ties to, like, we kind of watch him floating around doing a few things to do with certain illicit trades, until he finally, through desperation, ends up finding himself in a second suburban home of the picture, along with another character named Patty, who, this is where it turns into a real Todd Solondz kind of vibe film, because Patty does seem to owe an awful lot to the character Don Wiener from Welcome to the Dollhouse. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, I haven't, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, right. And there is definitely like a heritage of that in this, and not in a bad way, definitely in a good way. And it turns into kind of a chemistry piece between these two. And so it is kind of, broadly speaking, it is a comedy. It's a little bit too weird to be probably funny to most people. It's got a really big heart as it develops, which early on it seems to be kind of...
It's a mean movie.
It's
it starts out very mean.
Anti-heart movie to a degree. But, I mean, like any good movie that's in that realm that doesn't want to kind of skew so cynical that it gets a little tiresome, it ends up growing over the course of the thing. And ends up being, largely, I guess, what I would refer to as a chemistry piece between these two, and kind of and it's also kind of a Mary Poppins movie.
Yeah.
Because it is about how this character falls into other people's lives and starts making recommendations about little adjustments.
Yeah, it's true.
about how to improve on their lives. And I mean, some of them are preposterous, suggestions. Some of them are very logical, and some of them are just stupid. But they all work out. There's also there's some really solid music in this for the type of movie it is. Usually that doesn't actually crop up. There's a really good cameo from the Jesus Lizard's David Yao in it, which is I'm a big fan of, and he plays basically the antithesis of who he is in real life, which is nice. And it's just got attitude to spare. And when you start throwing around things like punk rock, this and that, I usually get a little bit get my back up a little bit, because there is a lot of, and we'll talk about that actually in the music movies, including this one, as a musician myself and somebody who's done most of what is being discussed in a lot of cases. I notice when there's time problems or just anything to do with the music industry that to me is kind of a little bit goofy. This one suffers from that the least out of all the music related movies that I saw at the festival, and so that didn't end up being a distraction. And I was able to buy into it in a way that when it comes to music movies, I always get a little bit scared of. I really love this movie. Man, one of my favorites of the year. Yeah, absolutely.
It's so goddamn good. Yeah. So this was a first time watch for me there, and the character that we're talking about who leads the charge plays it's Kyle Gallner playing Simon. Do you recognize him from other stuff?
He was in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, right?
Nightmare on Elm Street remake. He was in Jennifer's Body.
Refresh me if I'm wrong. Refresh my memory. I might have said something about this. I might not have in passing at some point in time. But I actually, as a performer, people rip on him really bad about the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, and I didn't mind him quite so much. I thought he was okay. I think he had a good physical look for the emaciated teenager who's not sleeping. So I don't carry any baggage into it the way I think some other people did. I've read reviews of people saying typically this guy sucks, but I really like him in this movie.
I am that critic.
You're one of those people.
I'm one of and that's because so he does play that role correctly in Nightmare on Elm Street, and it seems he's probably one of the best cast in that film. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, he's played that role for 10 years before that as well.
Okay.
He did it over and over and over again. There was a movie Haunting Connecticut, which he was in, which was...
Oh my God, I forgot all about that. Yeah, and you're right, he did too, didn't he?
Yep.
Yeah,
and right. I actually kind of like his performance in Jennifer's Body because he plays an over-the-top emo kid. Have you seen Jennifer's Body?
Yeah, I haven't seen it in quite some time, but
yeah. And so I went into this movie not a fan of him, and he was in Kevin Smith's Red State.
And I like that one, though.
It is good. Yeah, it's good. And he's so I think maybe I was bringing in a little bit of when you're I've been watching this guy since I was 13 years old. So I'm probably harder on him than some people. And watching this movie, I realized how wrong I was. He's so good in this movie.
Previously, you might not have been wrong, though, because I think you're right. I think he definitely had a type, and maybe that was just what he was getting hired for, and people weren't being fair to him. But, I mean, you had every reason to presume he was going to continue to do that.
Yeah.
On paper, he's supposed to be playing the opposite style of character, and so it's easy to go into this going I don't think this kid can pull it off.
No.
And he actually, especially comedy-wise, there's some dialogue here and there in this film that I wasn't I'd like to see a rewrite on, and occasionally him being tough is a little hard to swallow, but also that is addressed further into the movie when we start to really dissect his character and go well, is anybody tough?
Yeah.
He's behaving that way around certain people, but when he's in other company, all of a sudden he doesn't have the room to be impressed with himself anymore.
Yeah.
And so it kind of feels like it's aware of that to a degree as well.
Totally. Yeah. And that's you had mentioned it starts off as a very cynical and mean-spirited film, and by the end of it just transforms into something really charming, and I already can't wait to see it again. It's without a doubt one of my favorite movies of the year, and I very much loved it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as well. Yeah,
Awesome.
I was again very very happy, and again because Saskatoon Fantastic has the tendency, broadly speaking, to skew genre. I was kind of surprised when it came up, and like really happy for Saskatoon that they were going to get a chance to see
totally.
it cinematically. So
Yeah, totally agree. So continuing Punk Night, we have Uncle Peckerhead, which is available right now. So I believe it's on Amazon, but it's the only film that we showed this entire lineup that is available for you right now. So Uncle Peckerhead, a loose synopsis of it, it's another one of these punk comedy horrors where there's a down on their luck touring punk band that just can't seem to catch a break, and then they end up crossing paths with this absurd kind of, I'm trying to use the right words for him.
He's a bit of a hayseed, maybe.
Yeah, that's a very good word for him.
The most polite one I could think of.
Yeah, so he just seems like, the kind of people that maybe punk rockers wouldn't want to be around, or they wouldn't associate themselves with. But they find out that every night at midnight he turns into basically a zombie
For 13 minutes, no less.
Yeah.
On the nose, or if we take his word for it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So he's got some sort of ailment that just makes him turn into a flesh-eating monster every night at midnight. But there is ways to subside this. That's one of the things that kind of got lost on me throughout the movie, is I didn't understand how he was able to control it sometimes, or
if he was, and a little sloppy on that front. Yeah.
This one, this was a second time watch for me, so I saw this one leading up to the festival. I don't love this movie. I'm not really a big fan of this one. I think the strongest elements of it lie in the band themselves, and I think them breaking the trope of every time we see these movies with these punk bands or metal bands or anything, they're generally always really shitty. Yeah. And that I really like that in Uncle Peckerhead, they're a good band. Like I would listen to their music. They kind of sound like, for people wondering, punk people, like off with their heads kind of music. But yeah, so I think that the strongest elements of the film were when the band was able to play, but it really fell apart at the end for me. Like the last 20 minutes of this thing, I was like, I've never seen someone struggle so hard to find they had no idea where they were going to end this thing. It just didn't feel like they had that idea, and they got to that point in the filming. I'm speculating here, but yeah, it just didn't wrap up for me.
One of the things about the movie that kept getting me in a good way was there was a recognition of some real, there was a recognition of some real touring. Kind of reoccurrences that I found, like broadly speaking, kind of impressive almost. A few things to do with, like, I want to say the band interaction things that are just very, very specific things. The way they interact with other bands, especially some of that was very funny.
Oh my God, the other band singer, good God,
their rival band.
Yeah, that was, and we've all been there. Me and you, we spent probably an hour talking about like our experiences playing in bands where we would run into characters like this.
Yeah, and people who are, you're doing this thing where you're playing in front of 10 people, but people are striking up rivalries for no reason, are being just frankly very shitty for who and for what. And some of that stuff was very funny. There was just the occasionally very, very on-band thing that I thought was very funny, but as far as applying it to the comedy horror realms, it felt very tacked on. Like it felt like that they were aware, like for instance, when they're dealing with a promoter very early on in the movie, it was working for me at that point because everybody's done the thing where you get to the end of the night and the promoter gives you $3.
Yeah.
And how demoralizing that is, and like you love to there's something about recognizing yourself there for that, and there's something about recognizing you going, I'd love for something bad to happen to that guy right now, and having it actually happen. There's something about that just like it kind of feeds on your fantasy life a little bit, and I did enjoy that, but none of it to me really entirely was ever able to take off because it never felt like it really knew what it wanted to do besides string these like incidents together. And but so on one hand it had all of that stuff sorted out. On the other hand, I thought that it was really also very sloppy with its band viewpoint. There was a lot of things that they were doing that all the expertise they seem to have access to. There was also like, because the regular people are not going to pick up on these minor little things, but that feeds into that misconception of what people have about what tour, quote unquote tour life and all that stuff is all about. And it's kind of where those things start. And so it annoyed me and tickled me, and kind of like kind of about the same measure, but the actual core film I don't think was ever there was these moments, and it seemed to, I kept thinking this seems like it was reminding me a little bit here and there of Trauma, but never entirely going all the way. And then all of a sudden there's an actual scene where they're sitting there watching a Trauma movie, and I went like, oh, okay, so that's all on purpose. Are they courting them? Are they trying to get in with that group? And I don't know, it felt so unfocused to me. It was fun, but I don't like, I'm certainly never going to need to see it ever again. And again, for that, what we kind of discussed as being like pretty high kind of watermark of what you expect from the festival, it definitely wasn't one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit out of the bunch that we're talking about today. I would say that it's maybe the most forgettable.
Well, and that's the thing. Based on all those raw components, you would think that how could you forget something like that? But the answer is you certainly could. Like, we will not be talking about this movie a year from now. No,
definitely not. All right, so moving on to Wednesday night, we had our short film block, and then we went into Lucky.
Yeah, and that was one that that was another one that I saw as part of Fantasia. So this was second time I ended up getting to see this again. This one was really, it was interesting. It was actually, this deserved maybe a second viewing in terms of kind of being able to soberly absorb what it was trying to do. This is a really big concept piece, ostensibly. I've heard a few people talk about it as and very quickly another film ends up making it into the fray as a result of this, but I've heard a few people saying, just things about it being like, if Groundhog's Day was a slasher or something like that. But I think we already have that in the form of what's the
Happy Death Day, which
I actually haven't seen. But
I would say that's a lot more. This doesn't really feel a Groundhog Day-y to me.
I'm just repeating what other folks have said, and I think
heard that as well.
It's unnecessarily reductive, especially since the point to what this is doing is trying to get at the heart of something about how systematically cyclical something is. Now, the picture uses a similar. So ostensibly, it is about this woman who is being stalked by what appears to, like, especially to horror fans, will be kind of like your standard issue faceless break and enter murderer character, and she is being continually and very cyclically stalked by this guy, and as she is reaching out for help concerning everything to do with him, including talking to police, talking to whoever she needs to talk to, talking to people in her personal life, she's dismissed very readily from all sides to do with everything to do with this. There's this kind of modicum of concern that is directed her way, but in a lot of cases it ends up kind of being more of a conversation about, like, well, what are you doing that's allowing this to happen? Yeah. What are you doing that is maybe attracting this negative attention when it's a man with a knife? Yeah. And like, what could you do differently? And basically, how is this your fault? So, in case you haven't picked up on it, this is definitely a very like, it is ostensibly like a feminist slasher film, in that it's trying to discuss like it's victim shaming. Yeah. The movie basically, yes. Which I ended up feeling relatively the same way the second viewing that I felt the first, which is that as a viewer, just for me personally, I felt it was very, very ham-fisted in those points. But there's a caveat to that, which is that I then talked to folks who, when I would go back and unpack all of those things with, they went like, oh yeah, I guess it is that way to me, which nullifies my opinion of it entirely, because it means that the conversation still needs to happen that ham-fistedly if people are not getting it. Yeah. I think it's, in terms of execution, by design, is a little bit, like, it is a little bit hack, because it can't be too exciting. Like, the horror shouldn't be exciting. It's supposed to be about how mundane this reoccurring violence is. It's not supposed to be like, this isn't supposed to be Freddy Krueger or something like that. It is supposed to be this faceless, endless oppression that is being visited on this woman, and ultimately every woman is kind of the general kind of statement being made, and how it is treated, and how we explain it away, and how we make it the victim's fault. And I think that that's a really important thing to do, and a really important thing to study and look at in practice. Again, from a viewing standpoint, like I have to say, for me, like it's not quite into eye rolling territory, but it's just like I get it. Like I understand what the film is going for in those terms. I think that it on occasion thinks it's clever in ways that I don't think I wouldn't use that word, and that's where it loses me a little bit. It does feel a little smug every now and again, but the fact that I feel that way is entirely and 100% nullified by the fact that I had a couple of conversations where someone walked away from it having not entirely understood the gravity of it, which means that the conversation needs to keep on being this black and white, because we're not there yet.
No, and I pretty much entirely agree with that. I definitely like the film, from what it sounds like, a little bit more than you did, and I really like Brea Grant, who's the star of this film, and she also wrote the film. She's also, we've talked about her a bunch on the podcast recently. She wrote and directed 12-Hour Shift, which we showed at the Broadway Theatre a couple weeks ago, but she was also in After Midnight, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the year. So that's I'm sure people listening will have some kind of idea of who she is.
And 12-Hour Shift, like she's a really, really good writer.
She's a very good writer.
Yeah, very good writer.
I think that this is by far her best performance. I really liked her performance in this. I agree that it's pretty. It was very on the nose at times, but like you said, it kind of seems like it has to be that way. Especially, it's such a strange concept for people to grasp. I think that's the one thing that I didn't fully get the payoff that I wanted from it in terms of a conversation, but it's because in my mind it gets a little bit repetitive at times, because you are essentially seeing the same attack over and over again, or different versions of this attack. Right,
which again I feel, if I'm catching the intention, I feel like the oppression of just over and over and over again was supposed to be the message, and I think that it's important that it is, because understanding, let's use the metaphor, let's use a cat call, for instance. That is the point, is having to survive that over and over and over again. It's every 10 minutes, and to the person who is victimizing, the person who's using the cat call, it's 2 seconds of their life. But when the victim is going through that, every time they turn a corner, it's happening over
and you have to relive it and everything.
And so I do think that it serves a purpose, but the question is, was it entirely successful? And again, I don't know that I'd go so far as to say jury's out. I think largely it worked. I did think it was good. I did think it was very good.
It definitely, I can't obviously go into spoilers here, but I think that the movie really picks up in the last half an hour. I really enjoyed it, particularly a scene of the parking garage. I thought was excellent. I really loved that scene and where it was going. But this is just kind of it's a movie that I know isn't made for me. So I'm not going to be the one I'm not going to blow this movie to say I love it or anything like that, but I thought it was enjoyable, and it will be going on Shudder, because this was a Shudder Presents screening of Lucky. So it's one definitely worth keeping an eye out for. I think a lot of our listeners are going to get some enjoyment out of it.
Well, and I do think that it's important to keep it in the mix in terms of discussion as well. I think that it's that type of movie that I think is successful insofar as it'll make you, the next time you are watching a slasher movie, it is going to occur to you. So I think it does make an impression.
Yeah, for sure. I dug Lucky. So moving on from that, Row. So this is a Malaysian horror film called Row, and I believe that stands for soul.
Yes, it does.
So I want you to take this one away.
Okay. If
you're okay with it.
Well, I mean, discussing this at length is not. This definitely falls into that bracket of the I suppose the type of film that is we kind of mentioned Del Toro earlier. It does seem to be in the fairy tale realms. I haven't done my research on it. I don't know if there's a pre-existing cultural tale that this is kind of that this kicks off of or not. It kind of feels like maybe it does. It's one of those things where you've seen like something, for instance, like a Wendigo legend or something extrapolated on in a couple of different movies, and it's not the same story, but you know there's components of the legend. It feels like there might be some pre-existing legend.
Yeah, like it totally plays out and feels like like Malaysian fairy tale.
Right. And again, not knowing maybe culturally that, you know, to its core, I wouldn't go so far as to, you know, say I don't know that for sure. It feels that way though. And in terms of like being a really unique watching experience, I do think that like I like getting that sensation that I'm out of my depth. Like, I mean, hearing you know, somebody from that culture relate a story back to you is what it feels like. So it does have a sense of folk tale about it, which is always really nice. And it's about a family who is living in a forest, and they end up being I'll be very careful about how I discuss this one, because this is very it's very minimal, which this is another one of the ones from the batch that has some art house leanings. They end up encountering a young girl out in the woods, and there is something very, very off about her, and events end up transpiring that make her having come to their house seem like potentially a bad omen, a little bit of a curse situation going on. There's also somebody else wandering the woods who is a hunter, who is everyone who all of a sudden starts wandering around their house starts giving them a lot of reason to worry about what's going on surrounding them, and it starts getting into territory where there is concern about supernatural elements. It almost there was a little bit of an in vibe. It reminded me a little bit of Oni Baba a little bit, which was nice because you don't see that kind of drawn from very often. And actually gets alarmingly not violent in a conventional sense, but it gets like the physical danger starts ramping up, especially when you're dealing with like a kind of again coming back to a younger crew like of kids kind of that are in the mix here. And it starts the notes that it hits remind me of a couple of odd, very disparate movies. I heard a few people mention The Witch, which
that's the one that I would reference.
Yeah, I would definitely tend to agree with that, and it feels like The Witch through a completely different cultural filter.
Totally, yeah, it's like a Malaysian version of The Witch, but obviously the story's not the same. It's very different. It's very unique, but it's just the style and the dread,
right,
is what reminded me of The Witch. And when I say style, because obviously this movie looks nothing like The Witch.
No,
it's just like the general pace of it, and the how you're basically being fed breadcrumbs with this family, and then once those puzzle pieces start coming together, it turns into something pretty chilling.
Yeah, and there's something, and there is something very very similar about the isolation of it as well.
Totally.
Which reminded me a little bit of The Others, actually, which I hadn't anticipated in the mix at all. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And like just a touch, which is certainly, if you've seen The Others, it's not to say that you can anticipate a similar narrative thrust or anything like that.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. There's just a little bit about this sensation of this family being marooned and being only able to rely on themselves. And being very compromised, and especially given that how they're living in this Malaysian, like setting, really having nothing from keeping these evil influences out of their lives. And it gets to a point where there's this sense of paranoia as well. It brings in a really interesting batch of emotions that I don't think I anticipated coming in, and got very scary.
It's a creepy movie.
It is. This was one of my favorites of the entire festival.
Yeah.
I like this. And there was even those strands. There's a few strands that I thought were disparate and were maybe not going to pay off, and ultimately I ended up feeling like each individual component needed to be there by the end of it. I was very satisfied by the time we got to the end, which was not a conventional ending even necessarily. There was one scene in particular. They mess around with rhythm a lot in this movie, and it's not it's unclear, because sometimes it does sound almost like a bit of like a soundtrack rhythm or something like that, but it's actually components of what are happening in your surroundings. And there's one spot in particular that when it hit, I ended up getting goosebumps very badly, and I think we know which part we're talking about. In terms of I don't think I'm gonna walk this back. I think for me this was the scariest film of the festival. We'll see. I think
I agree. I would agree with that. This was a massive surprise for me. I wasn't sure what to think of this one going in, and I will, like you had touched on before, but I felt like there was a bit of a cultural divide for me, like in the first half, and that's just because you're introduced to a foreign place, a foreign territory, so a style of life that I'm not well educated on.
Yeah.
But that's one of the best parts about the movie is learning as you go. And by the midway point of this movie, I was just glued to it.
Yeah.
And this, out of all the movies that we showed at the festival this year, I could not. This was a later. I think we started at 9:30.
Yeah.
I came home and I was looking it up for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like I got really, really into this movie, and I was like texting Jeff and John and Jay and being like, "Hey, did you pick up on this part, this part, this part?" And it's like I realized that all of us there will be a natural reaction to maybe overthink this movie a little bit because it is just very simple. That's what I realized from looking up online is that I was worried I didn't get the ending, but I totally got the ending. I was just reading into it because I was expecting it to be way more elaborate than what it was.
And it also feels very overwhelming when you get to it. It is very affecting, and it makes you. I mean, it makes sense to me that you would want to see that through. So I think that's a natural reaction to what you saw.
Totally. And this one, it's just, I don't know, the more I think about it, the more I like it. And I know it's not one that you're going to be able to it's not a constant rewatch movie or anything like that, but I am looking forward to seeing it again.
I am too, and I do think that it's something that going back to what you were saying too about the cultural divide that you get initially, and maybe maybe a little bit of alienation. It's just not something you're used to. That is some of the best stuff about watching horror from a culture that you're not as adept with. The culture and the understanding of is there is something about it that is alienating, but we get back to what is the best thing about horror films at that point is the universal understanding of fear. And by the time you're deep into this thing, I mean, you do feel very lost in the jungle and you are not getting out. And in a lot of cases, as with a lot of other good, horror films, logic really starts being suspended, and the things you're seeing stop needing to make sense on an explainable level, and it's just having to deal with it. You're side by side with the characters, and you realize that the characters that they know what they understand their own culture, but they look just as concerned as you feel, and it's a pretty I loved the movie.
I loved it as well, and that's actually one of the things that I found from researching it a little bit is that there's obviously this. I haven't seen a lot of Malaysian Malay films in general, but this one I don't know if you because obviously you could tell just from watching it, but it looked gorgeous. This is a gorgeous looking movie. Yeah, this is a microscopic budget movie for Malay, and that's one of the things I was really interested to find interesting. I found it interesting to learn about afterwards is just how low of a budget this movie used. And apparently there are other, I read from some Malay film critics, and they were talking about how these types of movies come out all the time in Malaysia, or
Really?
there's where they're trying to tackle this kind of folklore or a simple story like this, but this is by far the best use of it, and it's one of the most one of the smallest budget films out of all of them. So I think that that's really interesting, but this is one that I highly recommend keeping an eye out for, especially if you're a fan of what we've just been talking about. If that seems it is a slow burn
horror movie, that type of thing. There's the different kinds of horror movies you'd show people, if they'd say, I want to watch something scary, but they're the kind of person who doesn't dig on, I don't know, whatever, they like something that's a little more erudite or something like that, or just your friends who tend to like foreign films or something like that. I wouldn't be embarrassed or scared to show this to somebody who doesn't think they like horror movies so much.
Yeah. Totally agree. Totally. All right, moving on to Thursday. I want to give a quick shout out to the producers workshop with Michael Peterson that we did at 1 o'clock. It was an afternoon event, but we had the producer, previous guest of the show, episode 169. Michael Peterson was on. He's the director of Knuckleball and the producer of Harpoon. And he's just produced a brand new horror movie called Bloodthirsty, which we're going to be talking about after Bleed With Me. So next up, or I guess quickly, that producer's workshop was amazing.
It was really good. And I've seen a few very similar workshops. He has so much hands-on knowledge of how to get this stuff done. He's able to, in a very tactile fashion, just, draw lines from actual cause and effect in a way that a lot of people who are maybe kind of fronting and stuck off in theory land aren't able, because he's boots on the ground.
Yeah,
and
he just does it.
And that means a lot. Like, it means so much, because he can very just matter-of-factly refer back to actual experience in a way that a lot of people who are maybe like trying to make some money off of doing something like this but haven't actually had the experience can't do.
Totally. And I want to point out one thing that made my jaw drop during this workshop. Was pretty much, I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes in, Michael was talking about how he worked as an intern for Ridley Scott.
Like it was no thing. And he was just going to wander right past it. He was not going to even stop and draw attention to it until you could actually hear somebody in the back of the room go, wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Ridley Scott. And I just felt like such an idiot, because it was like, we had him on the podcast. And I'm pretty sure we talked for like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And we were talking to him about Degrassi. But the man worked for Ridley Scott.
Well, and it's that's the thing though, is like I mean I think that it's probably buried so deep in his IMDb page you might not even notice it, because it's I don't know what he had as an official credit on those films.
Yeah, I don't know if he had any credits. He just more so was like his intern and was kind of like he obviously learned a ton from him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When the subject was broached, he did have stories attached to it, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. He has so much experience at this point that that's a cliff note. Like, that's just on that's just a tiny thing that he mentions in passing on his way to getting to his point, and like that you can't fake that kind of credential.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, then after that, at the 7 o'clock screening, we showed Bleed With Me, which is, we did a double feature of Amelia Moses movies. So both Bleed With Me and Bloodthirsty were directed by Amelia Moses, who's a Canadian filmmaker. And Bleed With Me was her first feature.
Right, and it was an interesting pairing, because she was kind of, in odd ways, addressing classic monsters in the two movies. So they were really interesting bedfellows. Yeah,
totally. And we had a Q&A with her after, I think, it was after both Bleed With Me and Bloodthirsty. Mm-hmm. But starting with Bleed With Me, so this is a film that centers around a woman who is like, a couple of friends from childhood reconnect at when they're adults, and one of them goes up to her cabin with her and her husband, and they just, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this.
This one's a delicate one to discuss, because it is very in the details in terms of, so, I mean, it is about their relationship, and you have to be, in terms of how the film moves forward, you can't give too much away.
Yeah.
They kind of gradually reveal that to you in the nature of the relationship, and things that are maybe points of non-discussion for them are huge ordeals as the film goes on. So it is almost a little difficult to discuss.
For sure. Yeah, and this is one that I saw twice, and I can say a second viewing helped a lot, because there is a lot of like little nuances that you could miss in the first, especially because the film turns, every good film, it turns into something completely different by the end, or at least it wasn't what you were expecting, and that's, on a second viewing, you can pick up the little breadcrumbs that they leave along. So it definitely is one that rewards repeat viewings. But this one, it's one of the girl, I could say, because it's in the synopsis on IMDb that one of the women she's convinced that her best friend is stealing her blood while she's sleeping.
Yeah, and that, see, the thing is even that doesn't. It's funny, because that sounds like an enormous plot point, but it isn't almost.
Yeah.
That's in broad strokes I mean, some metaphorically maybe what they're discussing a little bit, because it is that type of movie. This is another one of those ones that would definitely fall. It's towing the line, getting into the art house territory a little bit. It's much more relationship based movie. It's kind of about. I mean, it's another isolationist one, which is perfect for 2020, and it is about kind of being kept in close quarters with truth that maybe not everybody wants to discuss out loud, but it's the thing that's radiating. It's a hum in the room that that no one wants to discuss, and the boyfriend kind of creates some really interesting bumps in the road in terms of just the dynamic as he kind of changes his mind a little bit about a few things as he develops as a character. But it's because he's an outsider. He's kind of incidentally creating friction, and it does create some really interesting tension.
Totally.
And it is tangentially speaking, again, because I guess yeah, it's easy to discuss how she's convinced that her blood is being stolen because as I mentioned, it was a kind of a monster movie in that this is kind of a vampire movie, kind of.
It's a very, very loose iteration on a vampire film. It's very original. And
in that, with that as a function, I think that if you got even deeper into it being a vampire film, it would kind of maybe start skewing a little cheesy. But because a lot of the horror elements of this, because it seems almost more drama than horror, the horror elements in it are very hallucinatory and very
ambiguous.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. They really are, and I think that works to the film's advantage in a lot of ways. I think that those are some of its stronger suits, actually.
Yeah, I think so too, but I could also see that being one of the a deterring factor for some people enjoying it, because some people really don't like ambiguous films, and the film does have an answer at the end. Like you will have to do a little bit of work to get there, but it's just a very moody, dread-filled piece, and I really enjoyed this one. There's as a first feature, though.
It's very
one
impressive.
Hell of a first feature.
And there's one thing that I hope to see her in future projects extrapolate on, which I do think, I think she's very good. There's a trust she seems to have with her actors, which is a really good start, because especially, first time, that's something that you can't teach. You either are that type of director or you're not, but there's something that she managed to bring out in them in conversation. Specifically, I thought the eeriest point in the movie was literally somebody telling a story.
Yeah.
And that was the part that sent chills up your spine. And that was, it was three people sitting around just having a conversation. That is something I'd like to see her capitalize more on moving forward, because I do think that there's some serious power there, that you can have kind of odd, hallucinatory, horrific imagery all you want, but when the biggest chill you draw is out of somebody telling a story, that's unusual.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Very cool. Yeah. So
she wrote this one as well, and directed it.
Yeah, so. Solid performances all around too.
Yeah, Lauren Beatty, she stars in both of these films, Bloodthirsty and Bleed With Me, and she's great. She's one that I'm really looking forward to seeing what else both of these filmmakers come out with. Amelia Moses, to me. We still haven't talked about Bloodthirsty, but she's an exciting filmmaker, and I'm very happy that we were able to do a Amelia Moses double feature, then to have Michael Peterson there for the Q&A afterwards for Bloodthirsty.
Right.
So Bloodthirsty, like Bleed With Me, is another kind of loose iteration on a classic monster tale,
right?
But she makes it so unique and original, and this is a werewolf film,
right? And it doesn't. I think that it's kind of in a lot of the press surrounding it that it is one. I think that's almost turned into a selling point to it, which may work to its advantage, may not. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer to that.
Some people are going to be turned off from it when they're going in expecting a werewolf movie.
Yeah, a full-blooded werewolf movie, because it's in the mix, but it's not. Again, not unlike Bleed With Me, it's in the mix, but that's not the point either.
Totally.
In this particular case, it's about a singer who is getting ready to work on her sophomore record, and we kind of get a chance to see what her life is looking like surrounding a record. She seems to be somebody who is being really sought after, it shows her fielding interviews and all these kinds of things. She's just a very in demand person, and it's played by Lauren Beatty again. So that's it was interesting seeing these back to back, because she's two very separate entities in both of these, and and in this particular case, yeah, like it's this this kind of it reminded me a little bit of Vox Lux. I don't know if you
I still haven't seen it.
Yeah, like it just a touch early on, and I mean it kind of sheds that right away. But it is there's just this kind of sensation. She's this very in demand person who's very concerned about her future, and she doesn't want to like mess up her next big step. And so in order to address that, she is going into the studio right away with a new producer named Vaughn. But the situation with that is that Vaughn has a storied history. He seems to be kind of maybe I get the sense semi based on oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the record producer, the very troubled record producer that probably killed somebody.
Did he work with the Backstreet Boys?
Phil Spector.
Oh yes, Phil Spector.
Yeah, like I'm presuming that his background is supposed to be at least semi-referential to Phil Spector.
Well, they say he was in a boy band.
Yeah, which that ended up turning into something very funny during the Q&A. Actually, as it turns out, the boy band, how did that go? They ended up generating his. If you look in the small print, the boy band name is in there someplace at one point, but they just went to a boy band
name generator.
But the Lauren Beatty plays Gray, and she goes to this Vaughn guy in a remote studio to work with him, and he's kind of supposed to bring something out in her and he doesn't really work with people anymore. He's the shadowy figure. Everyone says don't work with her. Gray's girlfriend is saying I'd rather you not eventually as well, especially after meeting him. He's clearly a very off personality.
Strange.
Very strange. So we get out into we get out to this very eccentric location where he records, and if you can believe it, that somehow turns into a werewolf movie without getting too far into it. Because the thing is, the werewolf portion, which they do not bury, it's all in the press, everyone knows it's a werewolf movie, is pretty deep into the movie. It's not really out front. So this is another example of a film having these like very, very pronounced dashes of horror, but maybe not explicitly being a total horror movie. This one, to me, between the two, didn't work quite as well, and I feel like I need to qualify that. I mentioned earlier that of all the music movies, that there were ones that kind of did different things to kind of like push my buttons a little bit, and I was so distracted by the timeline. What would you say the timeline was supposed to have been in this movie? How long were they out there for?
You know what? So you just mentioned something I never thought about, but I could see that being an issue.
I think with most viewers that probably won't be the issue, but as they're working on her record, which I think they have, if they didn't push her as a musician as being such an important an integral part to the plot, I don't think I'd be distracted by this. But there seems to be this sensation that they arrive, and then within like an afternoon, they're starting. Like,
it's already getting weird quick.
Well, but as far as like the process of the record is concerned, like she comes in, she literally says she has nothing to work on, but they have all of these fully tracked songs within like a day and a half, and like just so much that's going on. I was finding I'm blaming me for this. Yeah. I was so distracted by the timeline of this record that was happening, and also there was this. It's co-written by a musician, so these should not be problems. But there's this thing that happens where every time someone goes to talk to Gray and she's like looking out a window, they go, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm working on a song." Like every time anyone asks her, I'm working on this lyric, and it's like I don't know. I found some of that to be a little bit too much. I found that the non-horror elements of this kind of they didn't really work for me in a lot of cases. The werewolf stuff, for the most part, I did enjoy though. I struggled with this one a little bit. I will have to admit, and a lot of it has to do again. I'll take some of the blame on that in terms of it being my baggage, but. There were things that I liked. I thought the performances, broadly speaking, were quite good. But on a script standpoint, I struggled with this one, especially coming off of Bleed With Me, which I thought was like I thought really, I don't want to say tender maybe, but like it was and it should be maybe mentioned that like Bleed With Me was a from the ground up construction for the director, whereas this was kind of a by hire situation.
Yeah,
like
she didn't write any of it.
Yeah, and I do think that to a degree that maybe that might show, because there might not be that intricate knowledge of what the film is about. But I had a harder time. I just didn't get quite as much out of this one between the two pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like this one more.
Yeah, and I seem to be in the wrong, or not in the wrong, but
Yeah.
I seem to be the opposite. I've talked to a few people that it's a flipped position with.
Yeah.
So like I'm definitely,
For sure.
As with all things, I'm never saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's how I saw it.
Yeah. And I think the reason, the thing that elevated this one a little bit above Bleed With Me for me is something, it's not even in the filmmaking, it's Lauren Beatty's performance. I loved her voice. I loved hearing like the songs that she sang. Obviously some of them are pretty on the nose as well, but I still thought that they were, I would like to listen to this. Like, and I really liked watching her process, as skewed as it may be. I found that entertaining. I obviously, like, I didn't think it was a perfect movie by any means, but I thought that it was just a really original way of going about a creature story. And that's what I think I liked most about it, is it, you know, there's a lot of werewolf movies out there. There's not a lot of great werewolf movies out there. And I would struggle to call this one a great one, but it is a really cool, unique look at a monster movie.
Well, and some of the intrigue that goes into it, I definitely have to give it credit for as well, because as the relationship between producer and talent kind of develops, and there starts to be more intrigue surrounding all that stuff, like it certainly isn't. Nothing about the construction is aloof. Like it all leads someplace, so that is good. I think I would just identify, like, I had more problems with it that were private problems than
yeah, no, for sure.
else.
It's totally understandable when that kind of stuff can take you out of it. But yeah, she's really good at domesticating monsters.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I thought that was brilliant. Yeah,
and that's what I want to see more from her in this vein. Like, and that's in the Q&A. I asked her if she would do another monster movie, and I guess some people were saying that she should be the one to remake Frankenstein. I'm like, I wouldn't go that far, but like I could see if she could do a riff on Frankenstein, I would love that.
Well, see, that's the big thing is, I mean, for the life of me, knee-jerk reaction, I don't know what that, like, I have no pitch out loud. Much as I'd love to pitch her and have her say, yeah, you write it. I don't have a pitch available, but if she had an idea, I'd be all ears to see what that's all about. Especially if she was going to be the one writing it, I would definitely like to hear that. Regardless of what she does, I'm really excited to see all parties, like all stars of all of these. I think are
Lee
promising.
Marshall and Bleed With Me is just three actors. I think Bloodthirsty is around 6.
Yeah, they're very very economic.
Yeah, little brief setting of Michael Ironside as well.
Yeah,
he's a frequent collaborator with Michael Peterson, so that was nice to see. But yeah, that was a great night. I really enjoyed both of those movies. But I will say, like, I got to give it some more time. My knee-jerk reaction is to say that I enjoyed Bloodthirsty more. But Bleed With Me, I've had conversations with Jeff and John and Jay, and like the more we talk about that one, the more interesting it gets. So.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, and there's somebody who I've been a couple of friends who I follow on Letterboxd, for instance. I haven't even talked to them about the movies. I've just looked at their scores, and I know that we have flipped perspectives on that. And I'm very curious to talk to them about that, because there are people who I would have presumed to have a completely flipped, like to be on my way of thinking of things. So I mean, I'm definitely open to doing a festival is a lot of movies all at once. So,
exactly.
You know.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to Friday night. So we had 3 films this night, and starting out with Jumbo, which is I would say is our most art house film of the festival. But it's a French film about a young woman who develops a relationship and a love for a carnival ride.
And that's about the size of it, isn't it? In terms of like broad plot, you can't really. I mean, as it is a love story. Like most love stories, especially cinematic ones, if the focus is on the relationship, there's not too much to discuss, because we need to spend all the time with the parties involved to appreciate the love that's supposed to be being looked in on, and like this, this relationship that we get swept up in. So it largely has to. It's the oddest relationship movie.
Yeah, no, it really is. And so this was one that I knew like nothing going into. And it's like, it's easy to laugh off that concept.
Everybody kind of does it on first glance.
Yeah, and then once you watch the movie, I still have no idea how you felt about it, but like, this is a gut-wrenching love story.
I liked it very much. I thought it was quite good. It does a really interesting thing where I think that it is in certain terms having a conversation about unorthodox love.
Yeah, or even obsessions. Like, this is like everyone that I've talked to this movie about, they're like, oh, it sounds like My Strange Addiction, which also Jumbo's based off a true story. Did you ever see My Strange Addiction?
I've heard the title, and usually it's in like, it's almost like a punchline when people bring it up, because they're talking about somebody who, like, I don't know, eats tax or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That.
Or has a relationship with a carnival ride, or their vehicle, which is like one of my favorite episodes. But it's this movie, like, I was expecting it to be a little more like tongue in cheek because of the concept.
Yeah.
But I loved how straight-faced they played it. And the director, Zoe Wittick, I think this was a first feature for her as well.
Oh, really?
And that's what blows me away, because there are so many gorgeous shots in this movie. And like, I don't know, I fucking loved Jumbo.
Well, I mean, I was talking to somebody else in the theater immediately after seeing it, and I think that it would have done a disservice to the sensation they're trying to get across to you had they spent a bunch of like energy trying to make the rest of the world quirky, or any of the world quirky. That's the thing, is this quirky concept is contained in a very grounded world.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of whimsy, but it does feel a lot more like a cinematic love whimsy than it does like something like it never actually gets quirky, and it takes place in this very tactile, grounded world. And it kind of forces you to take it on those terms, which never really lets you balk at the concept. It doesn't give you room. You're too close to the star at that point, and you follow her around enough to know that she is on a tilted perspective from the rest of the world. But that's also where you're going to spend the duration of the picture, is on her tilted perspective. And because we live so closely with her for that time, you're not questioning it because you kind of fall in love with the fairground ride too.
Exactly.
You kind of fall in love with Jumbo because you see how beautiful it looks from her vantage point, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do with a movie like this. If you make Jumbo a person, all of a sudden it all makes sense, but because it's something unorthodox, again, on paper, if you tell anybody
they'll kind of giggle at it, and like what I did. And
me too.
Yeah, and fuck, did it prove me wrong, because I was like, this was like a little bit of a tearjerker for me. Like, I got very emotional while watching this movie.
A few people walked out. I don't think you were there when it happened. A few people walked out like completely wiping tears from their eyes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was so effective. And I love without getting into spoilers, the relationship between her and her mother, and like how that's a prime example of something that that whole conversation could seem ham-fisted about, but it's not at all in this movie. They don't treat it like that at all. But just the generational differences, the perspective of love and what it is, and that's what I loved so much about it. And there's some of the scenes, like the way that she framed them up. It was like, that like there's scenes I can't talk about because it's spoilers, but I'll talk about it afterwards. Yeah. But there's
there's a few things in it that harken back to like a couple of other kind of forbidden love stories in it. Like, that reminded me a little bit of that Peter Jackson film, so Heavenly Creatures, a little bit. There's a few things that to do with like her relationship with she has like kind of she has a relationship with another person that works at the park with her, that is one that is just her faking normal in the world, and her trying to do her best to hold a facade up.
He's her beard.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some shades of that in Heavenly Creatures that I was reminded of a little bit. And it is almost like any other good forbidden love story, largely, but the oddest accomplishment of the film, I think, which is not to take away from anybody else in the film, is that you wind up very much feeling the presence of Jumbo. Yeah, as a character in the movie, totally. And it is true. Through the eyes of that lead performance, we are able to give ourselves over to that notion, and that's I mean that is in and of itself such an enormous accomplishment, but it's a presence. It is there constantly. There's drama attached to the ups and downs. It is an accomplishment, and it's the oddest accomplishment. It's a very, very good film.
Yeah, totally agree. And last thing I'll say about that is her mom's boyfriend. My favorite character in any of the movies of the festival. Like I loved him so much.
And somebody you didn't anticipate really turning into such an integral part of moving the picture forward too, right? Totally. And I mean just a much needed. Having all those side characters a lot of the time is baggage, but in this particular case, it knew just how many people to bring in to push the thing forward in just a very, very perfect way.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, so big thumbs up for Jumbo. Moving on from that, we had My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To.
Right, and I keep messing that title up because it's such a cumbersome title.
I know.
So we have, this is another one that falls under the, I suppose tangentially a vampire film bracket. And I, in this particular case, was immediately knocked over by just how dour this film was. I know I based on what I had seen, I was understanding that this was going to be a little bit kind of veering into the kind of mumblecore area of filmmaking. I would argue, you brought up that Jumbo was, arguably the most art house sensibility of this entire thing. I think that's a very solid argument to be made. I think that this is not too far behind, though, because I do think that this film, to me, seems very much like a lot of other vampire films to be about enabling, about addiction and about a lot of other things of that ilk. They seem to be having a number of conversations, but in a lot of cases, the relationships of those who are maybe complicit in certain behaviors and all that kind of thing, and the things we do for people who are suffering. And it's about all of those things, the source of all of this pain, and it's another family film. Just happens to be that there's vampirism in the mix. Yeah, it is a film that, in broad strokes, if you're looking at it, it is a film about this family who's living a very isolationist existence and are living just to help their brother subsist as he's going through what I guess could be described as a medical difficulty. And the lengths to which they're willing to go in order to make sure that he can keep on living when he's not living a very high quality of life, and maybe making themselves and everyone else around them suffer unnecessarily in order to do that, and not being able to recognize that, at some point you have to start looking at the ethics of kind of keeping something alive that is not enjoying any level of quality of life. And again, it just so happens that problem is vampirism, which is the least sexy vampirism that we've seen cinematically in recent years. Yep, I would agree with that for sure. So in this particular case, it is about this very, very meek and very emaciated vampire character who cannot look after itself. It is bordering almost on invalid status, with his older brother and sister. And we never really get into the backstory of how this all started, but his brother and sister are his keepers, and they look after procuring all of the blood for him that's necessary to keep him kicking. And we, prior to really getting into any of that stuff, kind of just look at this. And I don't want to say that it's we know that there's a bit of a family background, but we only really get into what's necessary in order to kind of get things moving. But it's not a a dysfunctional family. Well, it is though. I don't know. There's a lot of ins and outs about this that I don't. I see. You can tell I'm getting uneasy about it because I feel really at ends with judging the family after spending so much close time with them. Yeah. And I don't want to say they're bad people, which I think is a testament to just how affecting I thought this film was. Because after watching, you can put, A and B together on what a family has to do in order to keep a vampire fed when he can't look after himself, right? Yeah. They have to do nefarious things. But after watching that come from a place of love over the course of an entire film, I feel very reticent to just completely say they're a bunch of monsters, even though clearly they are. And we're treated to these really, really, really depressing moments of this vampire who's kind of a grown child because he doesn't have access to the outside world, talking about being able to hear children playing in the street during the day and how he just really liked to take part in the world, and them explaining that over and over again that he can't take part in the world, which begs the question, well, what are we doing here? It was so sad.
Yeah. Oh, I know. This is an insanely depressing movie, which makes total sense that I would fucking love it.
Yeah.
Like, I loved this film. And I love the different dynamics between, and I want to mention Patrick Fugit, like, being the lead. I think he's one of the most underrated actors. But I also had this conversation with a couple people during the festival, is that to me, it feels like the guy has range. Like, he could do a lot more than what he's doing. But that leads me to think that he just wants to do roles like this. He wants to tackle films like this, and I thought his performance was amazing, and so was I blanking on the sister's name, but I thought that all three of them were so good
across the board. And again, like I feel like this is one of the reoccurring. There's a few reoccurring things over the course of this festival, and one of them is there was a lot of family films. There's a lot of isolationist films, a lot of family films, and in terms of one that really got to the heart of this, almost felt like it was sometimes bordering on like Bergman levels of melancholy. Like, it really, that's one of the reasons why I would, its level of concern with existential sadness was the stuff of early art house. And that's one of the reasons why this one to me is like it's up there with Jumbo in terms of, I think, like Jumbo's like, and it was really interesting pairing this right next to Jumbo, actually, because Jumbo's sensibility was such that it was such a unique tilt that, I mean, clearly it was for an art house audience, for sure. Yeah. This one is more of like kind of, it harkens back to art house of days of yore. It's just, it like, they don't even really make them like this anymore. It had something about it that was so, like, next level, like, and existentially bothered, and not in discussion, because a lot of it isn't out loud. Like, I mean, it's silent rooms. It's not people talking about the nature of existence and all that kind of stuff. It is showing through actions those discussions, and
the film breathes.
Really does. And nobody gets off easy. Everybody who's brought in is brought in a situation like any if you can tell that if anyone is being focused on, they are going to be broken in some fashion at some point. And it's maybe the toughest film of the entire festival, which I was happy to see. Very much.
I guess I didn't really think of it that way. This was one that I saw before, and it was just even better on the big screen. But I just was so mesmerized by it. Like, it's without a doubt, it's one of my favorite horror movies of the year. Yeah. And it's just very much my thing.
I think that, again, I brought up the mumblecore stuff. I think that has had a really hard time finding its way into horror. Yeah. I think this is unapologetically a horror movie because there's a lot of really horrific stuff in it. There's some brutal stuff in this movie. But I think that this is, for the life of me now, I might turn around in like a half an hour from now and go, oh, I forgot about that. I think that this is the best utilization of that style in a horror movie that I can think of. I think that this has finally been a success because I think a lot of other pairings of those have been ill-advised, I'll say. Yeah. And a lot of the time they've been kind of, I don't want to say cheeky, but they've been kind of, it's been mumblecore trying to exert its like superiority over horror, which I, as we've discussed on other episodes of this show, I take serious exception with horror being treated as like a lesser art form or whatever. And this sees a very particular amount of respect. And sees the efficacy in bringing those elements and the chaos and sadness that ensues with these extreme measures. And I loved it. Loved it.
So good. So good. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to send you on your own for the next one. This was the only film of the whole festival that I didn't see.
And this is the most breakneck about face of the entire festival, which is going from going from the saddest and most like kind of just like kind of ponderous film maybe of the entire festival into what I only being able to call this thing a sugar rush of a film, which is Get the Hell Out.
Yes.
Which see, in this one, I'm not gonna make a meal out of this one. This was one that I saw. It was part of TIFF's very limited selection of Midnight Madness pictures this year, which was only 3 movies down from like the usual 10.
Yeah.
And it's a zombie picture, which, you know, automatically you're up against it a little bit with that with me already. I complain about those an awful lot. And there are some so there's a conversation to be had about this picture and about me potentially just not getting it.
Yeah.
But I know coming out of TIFF, I talk to you about this one in advance?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so the thing about this one is it is a film that I think, and we kind of talked about this with Roe a little bit, because it is there is a very good chance. Actually, this really does harken back to that conversation about Roe, because there's a very good chance that culturally I am out of the loop on this one and what I'm supposed to be getting out of it. And that is
Taiwanese culture.
The Taiwanese culture thing, which it takes place like immediately. We're in like the film opens in like a kind of a, I guess, a political
Parliament.
Well, yeah, it's Parliament, but like I think that they're supposed to be making some kind of broad jokes about what happens in Parliament there, and those would be entirely lost on me. Like we kind of open in the middle of where the film winds up, which is like a zombie outbreak, which is this very, very energetic, boisterous, very colorful, again, coming right out of my heart beats, like just the complete polar opposite on every front.
Yeah, I guess I didn't see it, but I from knowing what I know about Get the Hell Out, that is a strange pairing.
Well,
but it's a good way to wake them up, wake the audience up.
It is. And as I understand, I think that was the intention. But I mean, everything, even down to the costumes, all of a sudden are just like, it is bright and it is brassy and it's out of control. And that's the whole film, is just this constant sugar rush of activity and comedy, and it's just everything at once for an hour and a half. And as far as being what I want to see out of like there's a lot of chaos, there's and like that kind of just general anarchy that comes with this type of picture. Okay, fine. It didn't do anything at all for me special with that. As I understand it, and as it was explained to me by somebody who understands it a lot better, there are a lot of things that are built into this that there's no way you're going to understand unless it's, you know, you're culturally prepared for it, because there's a lot of things to do with like literally memes from another country that I'm not going to understand. It would be like having somebody from another country watch like Naked Gun or something like that and just not get all of the touching points. So I will say this, as an experience, I hate it. I really don't like this movie. It didn't work for me as a horror movie. I did not find it funny. I just found it really obnoxious, generally speaking. A couple of the leads are kind of good, like they're like they've just got some swagger that's kind of good about them. But I mean, the editing style I absolutely hate. It has very, very MTV. I guess that maybe that's an outdated reference now, but it just has a very, very fast pace. Because even fast paced editing doesn't bother me. It has this gross 2000s televisual editing style that really, really puts me off. I don't like it in any movie, frankly. Like, I mean, there's even movies that I like that kind of as a relic of that period have it in there. Like something like even House of a Thousand Corpses, for instance, has some of that in there before Rob Zombie started thinking better of doing that, where you just do like a triple take edit of something that happens, and it just horrible. This is nothing but that. It's nothing but tricks. It's nothing but bells and whistles to me. I will say that there's a chance that I'm missing some of it. That's the best I can say about it. But
this one has been extremely divisive.
As it stands, this is one of my least favorite films of the year.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, I'm happy it's the one that I didn't see, but I'm still like I'm definitely going to watch it when I'm able to, like when it comes out, just because I want to see every film that we programmed.
Yeah.
Because this was one of the ones that I didn't get to see before it was programmed. And, I couldn't handle another movie that night.
Well, and if you were like feeling tired and not ready for something else, like this would not, like, I mean, this to me is just like a pencil in your ear.
I knew we were doing 6 movies the next day, so I was just like, no, I'm staying for the midnight on Saturdays for sure. So this is gonna be the one that I'm gonna have to miss this year. So let's get the hell out. Moving on from that, I guess we will start out with Saturday. So we started things off with LAPSIS, which did you caught LAPSIS as well?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I caught them all. I got them all.
Cool. It's just it's one of those very small budget, small. It's a small sci-fi movie with a huge idea.
Well, and in a lot of cases, like the most successful science fiction movies, the one thing that the budget, like, I mean, a budget can affect what you can do with a big idea, but if you can figure out how to make a big idea pop for not very much money, then you've got everything that a big production has.
Have you seen Primer?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like, this is like, fans of Primer will, like, this is, obviously, I'm not going to say this is as good as Primer or as, like, intellectually rich, but it's just a very cool little sci-fi movie.
Primer is a proving ground for that as a big, like a big idea, leading as opposed to, needing the budget or whatever. Like that's, like the idea, if you can pull the idea off, people will fill in the blanks. You don't need anything bigger. Like certain ideas, obviously you need the budget for, but the big idea a lot of the time is enough to carry you.
For sure. And this is like, I don't know how familiar you are with Black Mirror, but I've heard a lot of comparisons, and I think it's pretty apt that this is like one of the better Black Mirror episodes. Like it's got that feel where there's a new type of technology, the world's in a different place, and we're learning about it through this really interesting Tony Soprano-esque character. Like that's like probably my favorite thing about the movie is they start you off with a guy who you can learn all of these scientific things with, because he's has no idea what's going on either. It
is a master stroke in a science fiction movie about a very particular type of technology that you need to learn about as you go, to have a Luddite be your vehicle, because he does need to slow down and have everything explained to him, which, what a godsend.
Yeah, totally. And that's I think the strongest elements of the film is that I liked the main character and the way that it was structured. Like
it was an opportunity to have an unorthodox lead as well, because he's not a regular lead by any stretch of the imagination. He
does look like James Gandolfini if he lost 200 pounds. Pretty much. But it's a really interesting movie, and there's some really interesting character decisions at play, but it all wraps up very well by the end. I think it does. It's one of those movies that ends pretty abruptly.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But that's kind of commonplace for these types of movies.
I mean, there was a good core. I do like some of the relationship stuff between the lead character, the Tony Soprano-esque character. He is largely doing what he's doing in the film. His motivations are familial, and another family film, familial in nature, and also we get kind of an interesting side bar about another kind of technological, well, it's not a technological advancement, but just like some other stuff to feed into some future paranoia to do with his brother, which is really interesting in terms of some healthcare system stuff that are hopefully not in the near future for all of us. And it largely has to do with this guy being put to work in a really unusual. It wouldn't serve as an audience in any way, shape, or form to describe the type of work that he's doing, save to say that it has to do with a future piece of technology that has to do with communications. But I mean, even that doesn't really do, like, it is such an involved thing. Again, I can't stress enough what we've already said about it needing to be explained to you as you go. If you break down the actual exposition of the film that you're getting as you go, we would be describing the film for 45 minutes because you are constantly being fed information as you go.
Yeah.
And it's all necessary in order to understand what the hell's going on. It is very dense. It's a very dense picture.
Yeah, totally agree. So that's a really interesting sci-fi film that you could check out if you were interested. Moving on from that, we have, how many do we have? I think we have 5 left. Yeah. Going on to Black Bear.
Black Bear, which was one of the kind of, I think because there's actually a star attached to this one, so that always helps that Aubrey Plaza is starring in it.
And Christopher Abbott. He's been in like It Comes at Night. What the hell else was he? He's been in some stuff recently that's kind of catching some traction.
And,
but yeah.
And I really quite enjoyed him in this. Also, I don't know if you caught this or not, but there's a character later on in the picture that is the same actress that it was the same actor that was in she's the label head in Uncle Peckerhead. She's in there's shared I just happened to notice that. That's for me and you, the audience, is not going to benefit from that at all. That was just the oddest bit of cross casting I noticed.
Yeah, because you couldn't find 2 more different movies.
Yeah, it was Uncle Peckerhead and Black Bear. But Black Bear is another trio isolationist cabin movie. So second time we've seen something of that ilk, but a very different style. The nuts and bolts of the setup at the very least, because there's a lot.
I want to not spoil a single thing about this one.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of it are about an actress played by Aubrey Plaza who is going away on a like kind of sort of Airbnb situation, like an artist retreat. She's an actor and a director-writer who's maybe working on a new project, maybe not. And there's a couple living at this retreat who we are gradually, like introduced to why they're out there. Like it's not dramatic, but it's just it's all in the presentation of the information because there's a lot. There's a real deep relationship going on between the couple as it's unveiled. We get out there and there's just immediately an enormous amount of friction going on between everyone.
Yeah,
and
the 3 characters.
And it turns into, at least initially, kind of an out loud ethics discussion, basically.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a myriad tensions going on between all the characters. It's very much based around that. To go much further than that is a very difficult thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to. And also I want to tell people that if you haven't yet, don't watch the trailer. You don't need to watch the trailer.
And I skipped the trailer. So
Good.
No idea.
And I do believe that this is coming out it's coming out soon. So it'll be on
December.
Yeah. So so this was the first film that I watched in the programming process.
Really?
The whole thing. It was the very first one. And it's my favorite movie of the year.
Oh, wow.
Like,
really?
I fucking adore this movie. And I was like fighting for it to get played. But then it came up about how we have a lot of other art house films being played. And I was so happy to see they got in at the last minute. And then it ended up becoming like whenever John was on the radio or he was on CTV, they were talking about Black Bear. So I was like, hey, motherfuckers, listen to me.
I can tell that this is the type of flick that's going to generate a lot of, like, for a very particular crowd, that's going to get a lot of attention, I think.
Totally. And I think one of the main reasons you already mentioned is that it has a recognizable cast. Like Aubrey Plaza, everyone knows who she is. But I have never been a fan of Aubrey Plaza.
Okay.
And she fucking blew me away in this movie. I think that she was tremendous. I honestly think her, Christopher Abbott, and Sarah Gadon are all amazing in this movie. I love all 3 of them, and I think that they absolutely kill it. But this is just very much my kind of movie. This is the kind of stuff that really excites me these days, is these really sharply written character pieces among like a small group. And I just feel like it was sharply written, it was socially conscious, and I just thought it was like interesting to the 10th degree. And then it has like a shift halfway through, which I'm not going to talk anything about. But for me, I can understand how that might pull some people out. For me, I thought that by the end of it, it was just everything was so well thought out and well constructed. And I thought that the director absolutely killed it.
I would agree with almost all those points. I think Aubrey Plaza is I also don't have. I wouldn't say that I'm not a fan. I don't have a relationship with her at all. Like I don't know for most people she's represented most by her work with Parks and Rec.
Yeah, and it's kind of similar with Kyle Gallner, who we talked about in Dinner in America, is that we've seen Aubrey Plaza do the same role over and over and over and over again.
See, and I've only really seen her in those parameters, but I don't really watch that stuff, and I haven't seen the movies she's in. Really, I think the most amount of time I spent with her was in the Child's Play remake.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought she was fine in.
Yeah, she's good in it.
But she's particularly good in this. So as far as I know, she's a really, really great actor. Full stop. She's really, really good in this.
She's so goddamn good.
And then as far as like, I mean, I'm trying to work my way around discussing this one without giving too much away. It is something that I think that I was oscillating a little bit between kind of being on the verge of like any film where you're kind of discussing and really making a meal out of an ethical discussion out loud, not showing the audience, but actually having an ethical discussion. You're always kind of towing the line a little bit of maybe making me roll my eyes a little bit. They pulled back in a lot of the right places in order to keep me in and to just get around my expectations about what they were planning on doing with all of that information. And so I really, really enjoyed all of that stuff. There are things to do structurally with the film that left me in one way not entirely satisfied. Not thinking anything they did was a mistake necessarily, but and maybe off mic we can talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to afterwards.
It left me wanting in a very particular way actually. So ultimately, I really did like it very much, but it just there was a few things about it that just I would really like, and I don't think that you should ever need this from the creator, but I would like to have it explained to me a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do think that occasionally that can read a little bit as a...
That's not a good thing if you need someone to explain it.
Not necessarily.
But what I can say too, though, is that on, I know you also shouldn't need 2 viewings to get a movie. Mm-hmm. But on the second viewing, I picked up on so many other things, even in the first half.
I can see how you would.
Yeah, that come into play later on, and it's down to like little looks that Aubrey Plaza makes, or like little like things that Christopher Abbott says, and it's all so like it just everything about it felt meticulous the second time around.
I don't think anything was left up to chance. It definitely doesn't feel that way.
And I don't. It's just like. This is obviously I can't talk about Black Bear on the Terror Table all the time because this is not a horror movie at all.
No, not at all.
No, yeah, it's not at all. But I just thought it was so interesting, and so like I love watching people act like real acting.
No, these performances are dynamite. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, and I think that's like almost all the movie needed. And I don't know. I fucking love this movie.
Yeah, it was very good.
I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but people listen to the show, you generally know my tastes. So if that sounds interesting to you, give it a look this month because I do believe it's coming out early December.
Yeah.
Moving on from that, we have Violation, which is just a barrel of laughs.
I don't know about that.
No, Violation is... it's a rape revenge film, but it takes a very different stance, and it opens up a very important conversation that we don't get in these rape revenge movies or in any it's just not a thing that comes up as much as it should. Mm-hmm. And I think this movie sorry, you go ahead.
Oh no. I think you were getting onto actually the core. The core issue with this film is that it addresses trauma.
Yeah,
and in a lot of ways, I think that I think that there was a lot of conversation around this movie over the weekend that was like kind of very, very broadly dismissing rape revenge films of past wholesale, and I don't know that that's necessarily something that I would do because I think some of them, if indelicately, have had interesting discussions attached to them. But this
just
film,
different.
very different,
yeah.
and not well in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they didn't try sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that there is something to that. But this is a film that was, by construction, it is without question, it is a rape revenge film, and and confrontationally that. And I think that, especially in the climate right now, I think that there isn't a lot of appetite for making that kind of film, which is kind of interesting, because I do think that we're at a time where I think that the audience is maybe ready to have an adult conversation about that, and or no, I shouldn't even say that. I think the reason why it is as jarring as it is because the actual components of what happens with sexual abuse are something that are actually being discussed for the first time, as opposed to maybe in the 70s when they were making these kinds of movies and they were, we were maybe like biblically, interested in the horror of all of this and understood on some intrinsic level that these things are wrong. But now we actually are discussing the emotional toll and the psychological toll of this kind of real life horror. And it seems like the filmmakers wanted to bring that to the foreground for maybe the first time, as an actual focus. I can't for the life of me. I'm sure there's got to be other films, but this seems to be the actual thrust of the film. Ugh, no pun intended. Didn't do that. But that seems to be the actual intention and focus and goal of the film, which makes it a very, very bold movie. Now, the thing that it does with pacing, though, so you think bold, you think, brazen and brassy and all this stuff, it's actually the opposite. So, and this is kind of overlooking, I feel almost a little bit rotten, because there's a lot of really good performances and a lot of really good things to this movie, but structurally it is still just that. It is a rape revenge film. But what it does that's different within the parameters of the actual horror elements of it is it takes a very, very sober, methodical, kind of procedural look at the revenge portion, as opposed to being something that is maybe, I guess, typically exploitive. It kind of gets into the really tough. Yeah, actually, hold on. What did I say was the toughest film? My heart beats. I'll take that back. This is the toughest film of
that's
the
what
festival.
I thought too.
Yeah.
I thought this one is emotionally draining.
It is. And I mean, we're again, harkening back to Lucky a little bit, this is, obviously this is on the nose as well, but I don't feel like I can level that criticism at it, because that's not this is, I think that this gives someone who maybe is ethically slippery about this type of thing a lot to think about. Yeah. And I don't know if that's what they intended. I don't know what anyone who would make a movie like this is maybe intending. I don't think that's the point of it. It is the emotional resonance that everyone should understand about how awful
consent works.
Yeah, how consent works and how awful forcing your wants on someone else without that consent is. And I'd like to think that I'm never in the company of somebody who needs that explained to them, and I also know that that's not the truth. And what a horrible world we live in, that these movies need to happen. That's in large strokes, that is what the film is, because it's what it does that's exceptional, and I think not prior seen, is its focus on no one ever enjoying any part of the process of what goes on in this this onslaught of bad feelings. There's nothing to be enjoyed about any of this, and it's not about that. It's there isn't anything sensational about the movie, which typically that's what you would use to sell a movie like this, is you're selling, it's a tabloid style of selling something. There's none of that available. It's only sober, cold, hard, light of day stuff, and it's a really tough movie as a result. Yeah, it totally is. And I think one of the this movie does so many things differently than others in the rape revenge subgenre. And I think the most importantly, it's the discussion about people close to you being the perpetrators. Yes. And it's another familial story of sorts. It's not, but
I also thought it was just very interesting on Madeline Sims Fewer, who's the co-director, co-writer of the film. She also stars in the film. She's the protagonist, who we get to see do some really horrible things. Mm-hmm. And as much as like that is like pretty much the back half of the movie, it's very interesting. But I did, like, in the Q&A, they had mentioned that the point of this movie is to make people realize that revenge might not be worth it.
Oh, like, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
During the Q&A, which was very good, by the way.
Thank you.
But it made me recall, I feel like if not on this show, I've discussed it on another show. One of my favorite films that advances that notion is Blue Ruin.
Yeah, so good.
Which I think is I hope that's a cultural point of interest that is maybe coming to pass, which is the realization that revenge is not glamorous. There's nothing about it that, although in this particular case, when it comes to like the travesty that is performed on her, like you want to see, like it is the sadness attached to that, and because she doesn't get to feel there is no feeling better about something like this. There is only wreckage when it's all over. And that's doing that to someone else it's the worst thing you can do, because the revenge has this sensation, like block letters revenge looks great and it feels good, and it just, like the way, especially the way we've always spun revenge cinematically.
You want to see people get their comeuppance.
Yeah, but in reality, there's a futility. Like, I mean, that turns into absolute existential dread, because you're just chasing something that doesn't exist. You don't get to feel better about something like this. Whereas like Blue Ruin, I think, is like a film that really explores that in a really interesting light. And I think it was the first time I remember really being cognizant of feeling like that was the discussion. I thought that was so important and so cool, and I still do. Yeah. In this particular case, that being utilized within the realms of rape revenge makes it so heavy and feels so. It really does feel awful, and it makes you like. I mean, I hope that. To maybe somebody who needs to have it occur to them makes them realize the gravity of this situation, because it is like, people who maybe don't see that direct line between what goes on in so-called rape culture and the line that eventually leads to an actual violation. Like they're the ones that need to maybe understand that, like words have weight, attitudes turn into actions, all that type of thing. And it is like, films like, this having to exist, or having to have that conversation that exists in Lucky. The fact that we're still doing this is so unfortunate, but in this particular case, like, if you're going to get that across to somebody who needs that message, violation's a powerful vehicle, that's for sure.
No, I totally agree. I loved it, and I think it's an extremely powerful movie. That's what I meant.
It's crushing. It's crushing. It's I walk back my original statement. This is definitely the toughest film of the entire festival.
And but I definitely recommend it to anyone listening who that sounds kind of interesting. And keep in mind, I've never been a fan of rape revenge movies. I'm sure, like, of course, I like Last House on the Left. It's a decent movie or whatever, but. It's just, these are never the types of movies that I jump to.
Yeah.
And this one had something really original and fresh to say.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, typically those have been, in a lot of things in the exploitation kind of avenue, a lot of the time, like, really, really hard things that nobody in society wants to talk about get talked about there first, because, that it's, border, back when free speech was, well, not free speech maybe, but like when certain ideologies were more readily available near pornography or something like that. Like, that's where you were going to find people having discussions about that stuff. And so there's like, they have their place. But in this particular case, like, that's also the best place to get away with doing something deplorable just for the sake of doing it. And a lot of these movies, like, they are eye rollers, because it's just like, why are we even doing this?
Exactly.
So when I said, like, I think that dismissing that subgenre wholesale is something that's maybe, I think, done often enough that I sometimes pump the brakes. There's some interesting stuff going on here. That's not to say that I think that there always is, because usually it's just like it's a scummy neighborhood to hang out in. There's no two ways about that.
No doubt. All right, final two. So moving on from Violation, we have the fluffiest movie of the festival, which is The Paper Tigers. The Paper Tigers is basically, it follows three rusty ex-kung fu masters, would we say?
Gung Fu, I guess.
Gung Fu, sorry.
Yeah.
But they are people who grew up in, like, with that, what do they call them? No, it's not sensei.
No, it's something else. Yeah, it's on the tip of my brain.
Sinhai, or, oh god, I can't remember. He's
I'm
essentially their sensei.
essentially the sensei, yeah.
And he is murdered, so it's all about them getting the band back together.
It is a band back together film.
It is.
Yeah.
And so the three of them, they get back together to try and solve and avenge the murder of their former sensei.
Right. And there's a lot going on here. Stylistically, this one I found kind of a little all over the shop. There was like, even I still distinctly remember when I thought that there was the first very jarring change of tone, because I was really not digging it, and then there was a joke that got me really good. I actually don't remember the joke, but just when the sensei dies and they go to his funeral, there was a joke that happens almost immediately upon the funeral beginning that got me really good, and I was like, that was a really jarring sense of humor change. And it does that a lot. Yeah. It's all over the damn place as far as that stuff is concerned. And so as a result, I think that the results vary an awful lot. Yeah. And which is not to say that there's some things about it that I liked very much. I think that all of the leads are really charismatic. I think they're really, really fun people to follow around.
Agreed.
But the humor not being there's such a huge consistency issue with everything to do with this, and the way they're trying to posit it. Like, I think maybe I'm pulling this from the Q&A that took place afterwards, which was delightful. I really enjoyed the Q&A.
Yeah, that Q&A was awesome.
Yeah.
Good work, John.
But I definitely, like, I believe they referenced Shaun of the Dead more than once, which I'm scratching my head over.
Yeah, entirely. I was like, what? How? They were saying that they wanted to make a Gung Fu Shaun of the Dead, and I'm like, there is nothing about this that is Shaun of the Dead.
And I want to see that.
Yeah, totally.
That's not what we got.
But I was like, this is more like Wild Hogs.
Oh, yeah, you were the one who said that. Yeah, and that is very accurate. And it also, I mean, and this is never worn well by any movie. It gets into that Hallmark movie of the week territory with the like schmaltzy ending, and like the single tear on the phone. Yeah, all that stuff. It has all that stuff, and it doesn't service the film because from an actual structural standpoint, it's doing fine without going into that territory. And if you take all that out, there's still a movie there. Yeah. You really don't need it. There could be some more, like, I mean, if you wanted to do more of a Shaun of the Dead slant on it, it would be more cynical, and it would be like the humor could be darker, and which is not to say you need to make it like a rated R picture or anything like that, but it is very Wild Hogs. Yeah, you got it right there.
My mom would love this movie. Like, that's the thing I got out of it. I was like, well, it did nothing for me, but like, that's the kind of movie that I could see my mom just loving. Yeah, and there's an audience for that. And also, I think I still am happy that it was played, especially after Violation. Yeah, because that is one way to wipe the taste of Violation out of your mouth. It's such a fluffy, harmless movie.
It is, but like, see, when you say that, I don't think that it needs to be. I think harmless almost sounds like a dig, and it doesn't have to be. In this case, it's bordering on a dig because it is really toothless. There's nothing about it that's very like I
love the story of how it got made more than I like the movie.
A little
like
bit.
in the Q&A where the director was talking about I think this is going to be a wide release film. That's what they were making it sound like.
There's a lot about it that made me wish that I want it to be something that's some of the components of what they tried to do with it are the type of thing I'd like to see as a wide release film. And I mean, like, nuts and bolts, I like it more than a lot of other wide release films. It's just, it's not a good. I don't think it's going to work for a mainstream audience in that capacity that it's
going to have to be majorly cut up.
Yeah,
like they got to take out a lot. Like you said, a lot of it was very unnecessary.
Yeah.
And the story didn't need it.
But I mean, I have a sense that, like, I have a sense that the filmmaker is attached to all that stuff that needs to go though, like because it feels like, you know, when there's heart in something, it's very evident. But when it feels like all of a sudden the room is a different color every time you make a shift over into like, you know, like a very like, well, because there's a couple of very particular relationships that crop up in the film that only exist in that schmaltz territory, and they need to be completely cut out. Now, narratively, the film is missing a lot if you do that, but I think they need to be readdressed at the very least. Yeah. I think there's a lot of chemistry between all the actors. I think that they're a good team. I think there's a lot of like good things about it. And I laughed a bunch of times. Like there's a bunch of good gags in it. It's just not. I want it to be better than it is.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
So and then our closing film, our very last film of the festival that we showed was Bloody Hell. So I always get excited when I see a film from Australia. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a big fan. Like they have a really good track record of awesome horror movies, especially recently. Australia's just been killing it. But this is like it's a horror comedy with that funneled a Monster Energy drink.
And another family movie.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Oh God, I didn't piece any of that together.
Yeah, I was thinking about it the entire weekend.
Yeah, but this one is this is a tough one to describe without spoiling.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So actually, you would be okay. I will admit of everything that I missed this weekend. I think I missed the first 5 minutes of this. So okay. I came in during the bank robbery.
Yeah, that's the very beginning. So okay. It's this guy. He's not the robber of a bank. He was in the bank, and he essentially, for lack of better words, because I've seen it thrown around all over the internet about this movie, is everyone's comparing this to John Wick, which it's another one where I'm like, what? Shut up! Like this is nothing like John Wick.
Well, I think that part of that is them positing that within the film, because I think people actually start calling him that. At one point,
they do, yeah. And they make the joke out of because he's just a killing machine.
Yeah,
like he's just a master. But then he tries to escape. He flees the law and ends up in the clutches of a cannibalistic family.
I mean, I guess that's basically it.
Yeah.
I mean, well, so like, yeah. Okay. So
what a weird movie.
Yeah. So the lead character is the action movie component. He is the living sentient action movie component moving through the movie.
Played by Ben O'Toole,
right?
Who I thought was great in this movie.
He's very good. He's very very funny guy and kind of playing dual roles in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is the character who he brings action with him wherever he goes is essentially what's going on. The film isn't, even initially necessarily an action movie. Well, it kind of is, whatever. He wherever he goes, violence ensues is kind of what's going on. And he has a background that they touch on very briefly. I don't know if I missed it in the first couple minutes, but they kind of talk about how he has a history in the military or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think that was all. I could be wrong because this was also a midnight movie after watching 14 other movies, so I was tired. But I could be wrong, but that's a lot of stuff that's just explained through dialogue.
Okay, so I might not have missed a bloody thing.
I don't think you did.
As you're going, they feed you information as they want you to have it, which is kind of explaining away through just a bunch of like newsreel exposition why this guy is a killing machine, and he has like I don't know if he's like Black Ops or something like that, but he's don't if you were in opposition of him, make sure he's nowhere near a knife or a gun. He's very dangerous. And in this bank robbery situation he's in, he winds up in prison for a little bit, and then he, upon leaving, he wants to go and live his life someplace else, and through a confluence of very funny events he winds up in Finland, and as Mitch already mentioned, not very safe for him to be there.
Yeah.
And through again, like the type of stuff this reminded me of was a little bit, when it gets really hyperactive, it was bordering on being, I can't remember their names, but the directors of like the Crank films.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And Mom and Dad.
Yeah, Mom and Dad.
I can't remember his name, but or their names, because it's two.
Yeah, and to me, it had a little bit of that, but a steadier hand. And I think like when those movies are fun, they're fun, but like they're making mistakes constantly, and this isn't quite that out of control. Like it's vibrating with energy, but it's not shaking so much that it's spilling its drink, which is really nice because Crank is just like
too soon, man. Too soon. It was only an hour ago where I spilled my drink.
Haha! I didn't even do that on purpose. But it's like a couple of spots reminded me of that, and actually in some of the editing, like that I mentioned earlier, there was some stuff in there that I didn't love, maybe. But maybe not surprising. I have no reason to be surprised. Some really good shooting, like some of the filmmaking, and it kind of takes like visually a very moody turn when he gets to Finland and things get very dark and all of a sudden turn into a horror movie. There's some really good looking filmmaking in it. Again, where some of that falls apart from a like nuts and bolts standpoint is maybe in the editing room a touch for me, but not to the point that it's a huge problem. Yeah. And then as you're fed more information about the circumstances that he's landed in, and it does turn, it's not like they find excuses to all of a sudden blast you with more action movie stuff as it moves forward, but it definitely feels more like a kind of like a survival and a very, very bleak survival horror movie for one that looked like you were going to have this guy. I think that's kind of half the point. You know, they posit him as this like untouchable action hero, but they put him in a compromised position very quickly. And all of that is kind of a joy because it's one of those movies where it's working. They found a way to make a guy in a room in a hopeless situation work for a really good extended period, and it does work the entire time.
Oh, it does. That's my favorite part in the movie is when he's strapped.
It's very good.
It's the cover of the poster, but when he's tied up, like that's, oh my god, there's like two moments in that where I was just killing myself laughing.
It is so funny.
Yeah,
it really works. There's a lot, not unlike where we started with Psycho Goreman.
Great way to end the fest.
Yeah. The bookends on this thing were great, and they were two movies that were not the ones I was looking forward to the most, and probably like even more than some of the movies that I really loved, maybe enjoyed more. Like I just
surprised you.
Yeah, and especially like for me, these days are very long because I'm working at them. I didn't anticipate sitting down to this like frankly obnoxious movie and really, really getting into it, but I thought the performances were great. The filmmaking was a cut above what I was expecting. And in terms of like it being a pretty consistently funny movie, I laughed a ton. When it gets brutal, it's got some blunt force trauma to it for sure. I enjoyed it a damn sight more than I thought I was going to. I actually really dug it.
Yeah, I just mirror everything you just said because I feel the exact same way. It was a ton of fun. Mm-hmm. So that closes out our 2020 11th annual Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival. But before we close out, I asked you to come up with your list of top 3 movies of the whole festival.
All right. Now, bear in mind, I do not think that these are necessarily in order. Because I'm still trying to. It's December already. I got to get my year-end list together.
Yeah, I've been slowly putting it together.
I think all 3 of these are going to end up on my year-end list.
Yeah,
probably. I'll do them in alphabetical
order. Do you do like all movies in general, or do you do one horror list?
No, I just do all movies in general. Although this year, because of Fantasia, I've seen so many horror movies, I probably could. There's a lot of stuff that didn't end up making it to the fest that I really dug, that I think were maybe in contention, but for rights reasons didn't end up. But there's a batch of horror movies that haven't been released yet that played at Fantasia that I think that listeners have a lot to look forward to sure.
I'm writing one down right now because I want to ask you about it if you've seen it, because I know it was potential for us, but we didn't play it.
Okay, we'll revisit.
We'll chat.
Yeah. So for me, and I'll do this in alphabetical order. Dinner in America, which that I know that one's going to be on the year end, no question about it. Dinner in America, My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To, and Row. Those are my top 3.
We're two. We got 2 of the same ones.
All right, so
hit me. In third place, which not even in order. Dinner in America. I fucking loved that movie. I loved it so much. I can't wait for people to see it and to hear more people talk about it.
I think it's going to be kind of an aftermarket hit. It's going to be one of those ones that, like, it doesn't have an immediate hook, and I think it's going to be hard to get people to see it. They're not going to understand why they should see it until they're sitting down watching it, and they're going to go like, oh, I wish I would have seen this in the theater, and they will have missed their opportunity to.
All right, so I got Dinner in America, My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To, and Black Bear.
And I knew you were, obviously, based on what you said earlier, I knew you were going on Black Bear.
Yeah, I just loved it. But I love, like, honestly, though, it's tough narrowing down 3 because I love Row as well. Like, loved Row, loved Violation, loved Bleed With Me, Bloodthirsty. Like, there's so many great movies this year.
It was a really good
To say
year.
Uncle Peckerhead was probably, or no, sorry, Paper Tiger is probably my least favorite. But, like, even that's still, like, I wasn't mad about it.
Like I said, I think there's a lot of nice things about the movie. Like, that was one of my, I don't know if I have a least favorite necessarily. I'd have to think about.
I'm just saying
it might be Frank and Zed for me.
Really?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I just enjoyed all the movies.
Yeah,
to an extent.
Even the ones I didn't dig overall, I enjoyed the experience of watching. I think that the festival is something you can set your watch to every year. I do think that there is a bare minimum of quality expectation that exists with Saskatoon Fantastic that I think because of how the amount of screenings and everything like that, it's really hard to beat because it's just been, better than anyone else, the lineup's been beat up to death, arguments have been had, blood's been shed, like it is the way it is for a reason. And going into 11 years, I don't remember the last time, like I can't ever remember having walked out of a screening and going like, what were you thinking? Like, like even if I hate the movie, I still understand.
I understand why it's playing. Yeah. No, totally. And that is all credit to John Allison, our festival director, and Jeff Drake, the assistant festival director. Huge shout out to both those guys. You hear them on the podcast all the time. They become really good friends of mine, and I'm very grateful for that. I feel extremely, for lack of better words, blessed to be involved in this community. And I also want to give a shout out to the programming team in Toronto, which consists of Andrew Mack, Dara Jade Motes, Stephen Landry, and Lisa Gallagher. And also a shout out to the Broadway staff. So this was a crazy year. It's unbelievable that this happened to begin with, but honestly it all happened because of you guys.
Well, it was a challenging year and we had all sorts of, anyone who attended will know that we had all sorts of starts and stops on just all manner of things. We had just acts of God happening, we had laws changing as we were going, and keeping up with it was tough. I will thank everybody that was on in and around the building. So we've got Aiden, Ellen, Luke, and Aaron who were in, and then of course the projectionists. We've got John and I'm gonna Jeanette. Yeah, John and Jeanette. Sorry, there was too many J names in there. It was making me question myself. Who came in, and also we should throw out to a big a bunch of technical work from our good friends over at PR Productions.
Absolutely,
Barrett Ross for helping us out there. Just a lot of stuff happened, and all of those people allowed us to get through it. So
yeah, totally. Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. And obviously, this is going to happen a bunch more times.
I say it every time I'm on here. Yeah. Whenever you want, I always have a blast doing the show.
Hell yeah! Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Terror Table.